nice. Oh my Lord, I can't even. Laurence, where have you been all my life? Well, I've been following you. Oh, what a pleasure to meet you and to have you on the show. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Um, that just made me smile. There hasn't been a lot of smiling going on.
No, it's been kind of a tough few weeks, hasn't it?
So tell us, I think I saw your name or I saw it on your page. Are you going to be doing some playing for the fires to raise some money?
Well, this Sunday I'm playing at Fritz Coleman and Wendy Liebman are doing their comedy show at the El Portal, so I think I'm opening up on that. We're
Excellent.
going to do it again next month too, and then Tuesday night is the Tribe are doing a fire benefit at the Canyon Club, which I'm playing at with my band. I have band Airfoil, which is my wings band. And we're going to do a few tunes. And I've also been playing around town with T-Bear, Richard T-Bear, so who you know. So, because Tony Bronigal and I produced his latest album.
Well, Tony, I just love Tony.
Yeah, Tony's great. And I've known him since, I think, 1977 in London.
Oh, that's
when I was a studio musician there. Yeah.
Did you know Snuffy back then?
No, I met Snuffy, I think, in the late 90s.
Oh, so much, because Tony and Snuffy go back to the 60s.
Yeah, because we worked together on that, on an NBC show called Three Sisters.
It's just amazing how lives intersect. Okay, so let's talk about how, before we get into your history, let's talk about current events and how, so did the fires affect you and Hope?
Not directly, no. I mean, we had the car packed up and, you know, it was nerve-wracking when the Palisades fire looked like it was going to head into the valley. But we're in Studio City, so not in the hills.
How seriously did you take it? How seriously did you pack?
Well, we've got a box with all the important papers and stuff, and then a line of cat carriers and bird cages, and
How many pets do you have?
we have 2 dogs, 3 cats, and 4 birds, which is kind of a small number. At one point, when the kids were little, we had 17 pets.
Oh my. Okay, so how do you wrangle cats? That's a very challenging thing to do.
Well, yeah. I have the scars that go along with that. It's doable. I mean, you have to do it when you take them to the vet. So, yeah.
But when you're in a time crunch, and if you're under evacuation, a friend of mine actually was able to get her dogs out, but wasn't able to get her cat out.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Cat. Yes,
well, the upstairs cats are kind of in a fairly contained area, and the downstairs cat is fairly easily wrangled. Yeah.
And so, with all of those pets, how many guitars did you pack, Laurence?
Just 2.
Wow.
2. Just the.
And what were they?
Just the Les Paul and the one I just played, because the one I just played is like my main Road Warrior guitar. So.
And what's your main Road Warrior guitar?
Well, this is a custom shop take on my Martin signature model, which they no longer offer because we can only do it through the custom shop because the features that I've added into it are not available in a production guitar. So this is really a one-off. There's not another one like it.
Wow. Yeah, so that would be a very important thing to take with you.
Yeah.
Okay, so well, that's pretty impressive that only 2 guitars were going with you. 4 animals.
Well, there wouldn't be enough room in the car for anything else. Not with the cats and the dogs.
Oh my goodness! And did you have a plan of where you were going to
go? We go up to Big Bear.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Head for the hills.
And did you take and it was interesting because Snuffy and I had very different approaches as to what was important and how much we were going to take. Did you pack enough clothes for a couple of days, or were you packing some serious clothes?
No, I mean I think 3 days worth. Yeah.
Do you know anybody who lost everything?
Yes.
I think we all do.
Yeah. I don't know that anybody. I think everybody knows somebody that was affected. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I'm glad you'll be doing those shows, and that one on Tuesday, I know.
Yeah, and I did one of the last shows at the Write-Off Room, and my proceeds from that are going to help too.
Well, thank you so much for your service.
You do what you can. I mean, it's I can't exactly fight a fire with a guitar, but you can at least make a contribution.
So we were talking before, absolutely. We were talking before we came on the air about COVID, and there's been something, I guess you were out here during 9/11, so that had a different kind of impact for you.
Yeah, that was a very different scenario. But during lockdown, I started doing Facebook Live like 5 times a week. And then that got a bit much, and I ended up doing it 3 times a week. I called it Tea Time with LJ. And I do it at 1:30, so East Coast, it was like 4:30, Central, 3:30. And that went on for probably about a year. And then as things started to open up, I didn't have the time so much anymore. And I still do it occasionally, and now I have my own signature blend of coffee. It's now
okay. Now I saw that on your website. So tell us about your coffee, because we're going to order some. What's special about your blend?
Well, it's half calf. It's a half.
Which is what I drink every morning.
Well, yeah,
you automatically do that.
Yeah, and it's a company called the Acoustic Coffee Company, and they have other guitar players and like Joe Bonamassa, Tommy Emmanuel, and also Jake Shimabukuro, And there's a portion of the proceeds goes to whatever the designated charity is. In my case, it's Guitars in the Classroom, which is a nonprofit out of San Diego that is very active in getting guitars and ukuleles in the hands of mostly elementary school kids.
That's wonderful. And so what are the what is it, a strong blend? Like I like a powerful blend.
It's a medium roast. It might not be quite quite kind of dynamite enough for you. I don't know, but I like it.
I drink half calf, but I like some punch. But I'm going to give it a try. I love that you automatically do that.
Acoustic.coffee is the website.
Okay, I saw it it's on your website though. People can get it through your website.
I don't sell it through my online store, but I direct.
But you must have a link.
Yeah, there's a link. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll check out your coffee. And so when you were doing those 5 times a week, I was doing the same thing, as a matter of fact, and I was doing it as much for myself as I was for everybody else. Was that true for you as well?
It was true for me because I really needed to stay in shape because all the concerts were canceled, and I could sit at home and practice, or I could actually sit in front of the computer and play for people, and it got pretty I was getting pretty good crowds, cyber crowds. And once in a while, I team up with like the Fest for Beatle fans and do an all Beatle program, and then we get many thousands of people. But I think since then, I think that Facebook has the texture of Facebook has changed.
Yes, it has.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think things don't have the same reach that they used to have.
And I've been trying to figure out what that's about. I think they're actually just in the last few weeks opening it up a little bit again. I'm not really sure what that's about. But I found the same thing to be true. I started out during COVID and the numbers were this, and then they all of a sudden went like that. Yeah, it's been very erratic.
Yeah. So, but how else can you do it in that kind of open format without actually having to go to a kind of subscription-based kind of webcast type thing?
Well, you could probably do it on YouTube to great success.
I did do it on YouTube once. The complaint was that on Facebook the comments are all nested, so people talk to each other. On YouTube, it's just a one-dimensional one-dimensional comment feed. So people seem to like kind of the socializing aspect of it.
I was just having this conversation with someone today because I don't know if you've noticed that if you followed Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or anybody like that prior, now you follow Vance and Trump automatically.
Well, that's certainly on and I was reading about that too. That's because the hashtags are directed to whoever happens to be in the office. It's
also because Mark Zuckerberg is just deemed it to be so.
Yeah. And that's why one of my thought is that moving forward, I'm probably going to start doing more stuff on YouTube. But
that's the conversation I was having with someone is there's nothing like Facebook. There's something so social, whereas all the other platforms are more sort of whacking off out into the world. Facebook is very social and interactive.
But you're still competing with an algorithm.
Yes, we are.
And as a result, I'll post stuff, and whereas 2-3 years ago I would reach a lot more people. Absolutely. Now it seems to have kind of narrowed down. Now that may be because now I have to work it harder to reach out to more people. But I think in Facebook's case, because their business model is basically they want you advertising.
Absolutely. That's the ticket. That's the ticket.
So there's no free lunch there,
Yeah, there's no free lunch. Yeah. There's a thing though, where if you take your page professional, they're a little kinder. We can talk about that later, but I have 2 pages.
I have my personal page, but also my artist page.
But now you can make your personal page professional without losing anything. And once I did that, I mean, there was a time when literally my videos on my page would say 40 people were watching, but on anybody else's page, it would say 600 people were. It was very weird. But as soon as I turned it professional, the numbers changed. Anyway, we can talk about that afterwards. And
Well, it would be great if I could merge my two pages.
you can't do that, but you can
No.
make your personal page professional and not lose anything. In the old days, you would lose something, and now you don't.
Okay. Well, but
And
the
so,
problem with the personal page is you're limited to 5,000 friends.
well, now you're not. Now it's all followers on your personal.
Okay.
It
Well, that's
becomes,
good to know.
you
Thank
don't
you
lose
for
your
the
friends
tip.
and it all becomes followers.
Okay.
And you shouldn't lose anything. And yeah, it'd be nice if we could merge your pages. But anyway, you are a gift to everybody on Facebook, to everybody everywhere who listens to music. And I want to talk about that for before I get to that, what were you doing when COVID started, Laurence? What were you in the middle of, and what did it interrupt for you?
Just a whole bunch of tour dates that all got canceled.
Mm.
And you know, my touring is not going out for months at a time. I mean, I'll go out for 3-4 days. There was a time when I would do a run of gigs and fly back from Chicago or wherever on a Sunday morning and be at Capitol at 2 o'clock for a session.
Wow.
Yeah, but you see, now I wouldn't do that anyway, because it used to be that you could fly out the same day and still do the gig. Now
Right.
you can't rely on that.
Right. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So you're still okay. So touring and sessions still.
Yeah, so I was doing solo concerts then, you know, and there were a bunch of shows that got canceled. And then gradually in the course of that all shut down in March. I think by September, there were some local things, masked, live streaming local things. Like I did some things with the Tribe that kicked in right around that time.
And so now, what does your professional life look like now?
I kind of pivoted a little bit more back to studio work, to producing, composing, arranging. And, I've done some projects over the last couple of years. I did T-Bear's
musicals.
Well, musicals, that's been going on forever. I mean, that was, we started working on our Gilligan's Island musical in 1988 and did a definitive version of it in Thousand Oaks in 2001. And then, for various reasons, had to wait about 6-7 years before we could get it published. But that gets done all over the place. Community theaters do it, and even high school.
Isn't there another one that you're working on currently?
Well, there's the Brady Bunch musical, which we're just kind of sitting on our thumbs, waiting for a theater where we can actually, get it produced. And then
Okay.
I am the arranger.
And part of the plan, isn't there part of the plan?
Yeah, I'm the arranger for Part of the Plan, which is a musical that's an original stage play that incorporates Dan Fogelberg songs.
So that's like a jukebox musical kind of thing?
Not exactly. I mean, the songs are very carefully integrated into the plot, so it doesn't feel like a jukebox musical.
I prefer that. Jukebox musicals are kind of.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, it's basically, that became a thing. And sometimes, I mean, I remember we went to see Baby It's You in Pasadena Playhouse. And I thought it was really kind of well done. And then they took it to Broadway and really just turned it into a jukebox musical, and it didn't do well. So, and it's not that I necessarily have any great passion for musical theater. In fact, our daughter Nico that's the world that she's in, because she had a musical produced off Broadway in 2023 called Millennials Are Killing Musicals.
How fantastic.
Yeah, we're very proud of her for that, and watch that space, because that may show up locally at some point.
Where did she train?
She didn't. She's not a trained musician. She just has a natural aptitude for writing those kind of songs. As our daughter Ilse, who is a very successful commercial songwriter. Now, Ilse went to Cal Arts for a semester, but it was too academic, and then went to Musicians Institute, and she said the only thing she really learned there was how to network, because she was writing songs from the time she was like 13, and eventually started writing hit songs for people. So,
How
and
spectacular is
she
that?
has 7 songs on Jelly Roll's album, including a feature. So,
Oh
oh
my.
yeah, she wrote Panic at the Disco's High Hopes, Shawn Mendes' Mercy, Miley Cyrus, Mark Ronson, Nothing Breaks Like a Heart.
Wow.
Oh yeah, All Night on Beyonce's Lemonade album. Hashtag Proud Parents.
Hashtag,
Yeah.
hell yeah. How fantastic is that? How wonderful is that? And how old is she?
And I shouldn't say.
Well, but I mean,
She's
she's an
she's in her
overachiever.
30s, we'll say that. Yeah.
She's an overachiever out there. And she, wow, that's incredible. How
Well,
exciting.
I don't consider it to be an overachievement, because it's when you work in that world. I mean, you know how commercial music is. And she just worked very hard and works very well with artists, and just has the right kind of sensibility for
How
that
spectacular.
kind of business. Yeah.
How spectacular. And your other daughter to have written a musical that's been
Yeah.
produced
Actually,
is
she has 2
spectacular.
musicals. She has another musical that's doing they're doing a workshop at Goodspeed in Connecticut next month.
As opposed to Godspeed. I love it. That's fantastic. Well, Lawrence, how wonderful. That says a lot about you and Hope to
Yeah,
have
and Hope had
raised.
a Hallmark Christmas movie called Holiday Crashers that aired this last Christmas. So lots of stuff going on around here. But for me, I mean, I produced T-Bear's album with Tony Braunagel. I co-produced Billy J. Kramer's latest album, which we recorded at Abbey Road for his 80th birthday.
Oh,
And right now I'm working with a friend of ours, Christina Rich, who's a wonderful singer. We're playing at Vibrato on February 15th. No, February 19th, I'm sorry. And doing a show that we're going to do, I think, a dozen Jimmy McHugh songs, which we're preparing to record for an album. But doing like contemporary style arrangements as opposed to, because these are songs, some of these songs are almost 100 years old now.
wow.
I Can't Give You Anything But Love and stuff like that. Those are not recent songs. I mean, it's when you think about the fact that like Gershwin songs are starting to go into the public domain.
That's insane.
To Watch Over Me, for example. Yeah,
Wow. Well, so nobody's sitting around at your house
oh good.
doing nothing, eating bonbons and watching television, I'm
No,
guessing.
no. There's always creative work going on, because it's what we do. We just stay busy.
Is that the work ethic you were brought up in, Lawrence?
It's the work ethic I developed, because when I started playing guitar when I was 11.
Okay, now is it true that the Beatles is what turned your head around?
Um, Partially. I mean, I was already wanting to play guitar before the Beatles, before Beatlemania.
What started that for you?
Well, it was the Shadows, Cliff Richard's backing group, the Shadows, kind of like the English version of the Ventures.
Hmm.
They would have played surf music, but we didn't have the surf.
So
But they did have these
what was
twangy
the
guitar
equivalent?
hits.
What was the equivalent of surf in London
Well,
in
I
London?
mean, it was just, we didn't have any of those kind of American niceties. I mean,
Mhm.
Hank Marvin of the Shadows was the first guitarist in England to get a Fender Stratocaster. I mean, it was, because there was an embargo on American imports for a while in the 50s. And so I really, I fell in love with the sound of the guitar. And then, 1963, there was this kind of growing wave of Beatlemania, which by August of that year, when She Loves You came out, I mean, that, made a big impression. And then I really wanted to play guitar, and my dad wanted me to play the saxophone. So I kind of grudgingly agreed that I would play the saxophone. I
Was your
played,
father a musician?
no, he was a big band fan though.
Okay.
Yeah.
What
No,
did your father do?
my parents, he did various things, but when I was born, my parents had a grocery store in the East End of London. And then eventually he ended up with a liquor store also in the East End. But he died young. He was 51 when he died. He actually died a month before I joined Wings, but that's a whole other story. But I only discovered relatively recently that my dad's mother's side of the family was where all the creative people were. Costume designers, musicians. And so there was something in the DNA, but I was not aware of it, for many years. But my dad wanted me to play the saxophone, so I grudgingly agreed to learn the clarinet in school. But I made sure my name was at the bottom of the list, so they ran out.
That was my school instrument as well.
Yeah. And then on my 11th birthday, I got a guitar. They gave me a guitar because part of it, I think, was because the Beatles had done the Royal Command performance the week before. That was the Rattle Your Jewelry when John made that speech. And I think that it somehow, them doing that made the guitar kind of a lot more of a kosher instrument. It wasn't a hooligan instrument as much. And once I got a guitar, I couldn't put it down. But it was also, it was really a combination of two things. One was the guitar itself, but the other one was music. And the fact that I fell in love with the sound of records.
And what records were you
lie in bed
to?
listening to the radio and just listening to what the kick drum and the bass guitar were doing.
And what kind of music were you listening to?
Pop music. I mean, we had... The BBC was pretty conservative at that point, but I could listen in the evenings. They'd played like jazz. I'd listen to Louis Armstrong and stuff like that. But Radio Luxembourg, which broadcast from the continent, was playing American Top 40. So that was where I first heard Motown records and Carole King and stuff that was a very different, very different from the kind of the more conservative stuff that the UK, the BBC was playing.
And were you teaching yourself? Were you taking lessons?
I had a few lessons, but I mostly taught myself. I actually learned to sight read in an afternoon out of a book called Play in a Day.
What?
Yeah, well, it rained a lot, so, I couldn't go running around outside playing soccer or whatever. So
Play in a Day?
Play in a Day. It was a famous book, a guitar player named Bert Whedon, famous studio player in England. And you ask, any of the English guitar players, they know that book. Because it was, and in the back of the book it had When the Saints Go Marching in notation in the key of C. And it was like, okay, that's a C and that's there. So I just associated the patterns. I think part of it for me, and still to this day, is that my understanding of music and of the guitar is really based on recognizing the patterns, whether it's harmonic or fingering or rhythmic or whatever. It's somehow that's just part of the way that I process that information.
And how were you drawn to fingering? How did that? Was acoustic guitar always your passion?
No, I mean I played electric guitar too. I still do, and
of course, but I mean.
But there were two things that happened. One was a local band leader started taking me out and playing like weddings and stuff. And so I got a lot of my ear training and starting to learn repertoire on the bandstand with older musicians. But also I was, you remember 1963, folk music was pop music. So Bob Dylan was all, this finger-picking stuff. And then we had Bert Jansch and John Remborn, who later had a band called Pentangle in England. And they were fingerstyle players. And I started getting into ragtime. And Paul Simon was doing all this fingerstyle stuff. And I just loved the self-sufficiency of the folk guitar players. When I was 14, 15 years old, I had a duo with a friend of mine, and we would open at a local folk club for people like Al Stewart and Martin Carthy, and which was funny because years later I ended up producing 4 albums for Al Stewart and touring.
Yes, so I've read.
But that self-sufficiency, I loved that, and that became kind of a thread. And in high school, I needed to learn classical guitar, because I wanted to study music and I needed grade level, like grade 6 to do A-level music and then to get into college, grade 8. So I took classical guitar lessons in high school. And that was helpful because that's fingerstyle, but it's just, it's not, when you're on nylon strings, it's different from doing it on steel strings. And but the process was the same. And the idea that you could play more than one part at the same time, on one guitar. You could play a bass line and a melody at the same time. And so that also fed into my understanding of how music was put together, how the bass parts worked, how the melody worked, and all of that.
So how old were you when you were starting to earn your living as a musician? It sounds like you were very young.
Well, when I was 13, I was actually getting paid to do it.
Wow.
And the fact is that it was like I could do that, or I could work at the local supermarket on Saturdays, or babysit, or wash my neighbor's car. And my neighbor had season tickets to Tottenham Hotspur games. So if my brother and I washed his car, we would get like tickets to the reserve team games. And my babysitting money basically kind of bought me some LPs, but really it was, I got paid more to go and play guitar. And I thought, well, this is good. I want to make a living doing this. And then I learned about being a studio musician, and that became my burning ambition, was to be a studio player, which is why I really focused on the sight reading and the versatility end of things.
What about that? What drew you to that as being the thing you wanted to do as opposed to playing live?
Because it was the brass ring. That
So,
was, that to be
at that level?
a studio musician was something to aspire to. I mean, when you think about even players like Jimmy Page, I mean, he was a studio player in London, and Nicky Hopkins, and some of the icons in English rock really started as studio players, not as band players. And because I loved all styles of music, and I played with the National Youth Jazz Orchestra, for example, which was a big band, and that was kind of like a farm team for the studio world. So I loved playing rock and roll, and I loved playing blues, and to improvise. I mean, I have always enjoyed improvising, because that's a creative outlet that's very different from composing or arranging meticulously putting together a piece for performance, as opposed to just being able to pick up a guitar and jam. But and that's part of the whole formula. But that I just immersed myself in all of that. So I was just, jumping from one gig to another as a teenager, playing in folk clubs, playing at weddings, and rehearsing with, rock bands, and then, playing with jazz bands too. And once in a while, even doing something classical. So I liked that variety.
So it was variety at that point rather than having a band of your own at that time.
Oh, absolutely. I did have a few bands as a teenager, and I, as a freelance player, I worked with some bands, but that wasn't the ultimate ambition. The ambition was to make a living as a freelance guitar player, a professional guitarist.
And so what do you remember what your first professional session was?
One of my first big sessions was for a singer named Cleo Lane, English jazz singer. And I had worked with her husband, John Dankworth, in the National Youth Jazz Orchestra, because we did some of his arrangements, and he performed with us occasionally. But this, George Martin was producing. So, I'm right out of college. I'm in the studio with people that, whose experience was far beyond mine. And it was a great learning experience. I mean, I freely admit I made mistakes, not realizing that if I used a capo, I could make my life a lot easier if I was playing in the key of B major, which is not a guitar-friendly key. But, you learn, but I learned on the job. And then I was doing sessions. Sometimes I didn't know who I was playing for. I mean, I did a session at Abbey Road. I think my first session at Abbey Road in Studio 2, which was where the Beatles recorded. I did a session there on a Tuesday night with a string orchestra and a Francis Monkman from Curved Air playing harpsichord and some mandolin players. I was on acoustic guitar, and I had no idea what it was for till like 25 years later. I read it in a magazine when they were interviewing Alan Parsons, and he said, and we had Laurence Juber play guitar. We did. Turned out, it was for the Tales of Mystery and Imagination album. That was the first Alan Parsons Project album. Stuff like that would come up. French disco sessions. And I played with this artist, this drummer named Cerrone, and I had no idea. They were just kind of very late night sessions where you're playing like 20 minutes worth of music in one take, and with an amazing Ray Cooper from Elton John's band, playing hi-hat, and Dave Maddox from Fairport Convention just playing kick and snare. And I thought, well, this is kind of good sight reading practice, and it was paid well. And then years later, I'm reading Billboard magazine. It said the two founding fathers of Euro disco, Giorgio Moroder and Cerrone. And it was like, these records were big hits in the clubs. But I had no idea because I didn't hang out at like Studio 54 or any of those places.
Wow. So now this is going on. And how old are you when you're getting this early session work?
22. 20.
So you've already done college. Somebody's asking where you went to college.
Yeah, this is straight out of college. Yeah.
And you went to Goldsmith?
I went to Goldsmiths, which is one of the London University colleges. And there were two. What happened was I had applied to a music school in Leeds, which is about 2 hours north of London. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, their program was the only one in England that was similar to what you would get at like the Berklee School of Music. Mm-hmm. And they had like a studio guitar program, and I got accepted there. And then when I got my A-level results, which is like, when you graduate from high school, and I got an A in music, which nobody expected me to get. Because my teachers, I was not a piano player. I didn't fit the mold of the typical music student, or student, I should say. Keep my English pronunciation there. And once I realized that I could actually get into university to study music, I took a gap year. I was a pioneer of the gap year, which then became a thing later. And I applied to London University, and the professor there, Stanley Glasser, was a South African composer who was a big jazz fan. So when I went for my interview, we just talked about jazz guitar players. And that was a 3-year Bachelor of Music degree. And I didn't study guitar, I studied music. In fact, I taught guitar while I was there.
Like music theory? What do you mean?
Music theory,
music theory.
Musicology, and the musicology side of it was really valuable because it really helped with my understanding of style. Because as a studio musician, understanding style is such an important attribute. And later, once I realized that I could also compose.
Okay, that was my next question. So how did that start to happen for you, and when did that start to happen for you?
That didn't really happen until I got to LA, the 80s. But there was a lot that went on before that, because again, my focus was entirely on being a guitar player.
And did it ever dawn on you that, one day I'm going to play with a Beatle?
Well, one can dream, but
I mean, was that a part of a dream too?
Well, I mean, when you're 13 years old and walking to school, and it's like, well, wouldn't it be cool to play with the Beatles? Little did I know that I ended up playing with 3 out of the 4.
Okay, I know about Ringo and Paul,
and George too. Worked with George. I worked with him on the soundtrack to Shanghai Surprise, which was a very odd movie. Played on a few strange movies over the years. But
like Ishtar, what else?
Ishtar.
You played on Ishtar.
Well, Paul Williams wrote all these really great
Paul's a good
songs.
friend. I love Paul.
Yeah, I've done a lot of work with Paul over the years. So I went through London University. I'm studying music. I'm gigging weekends, just doing kind of casual stuff. Starting to get demo sessions. the year prior to me going in, my gap year, I really worked kind of professionally around London and kept that up. And I would, so it got to the point where I would go like do a week subbing for one of the guitar players in the pit band of Jesus Christ Superstar, and working musicals in the West End.
So you were a high-level reader then?
Yeah, I could read.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I could read better then than I do now because I don't have to do it the same way. But and so it was getting me gigs, and the versatility allowed me to kind of step into different kinds of shoes. And then right out of college was when I started. What happened was I was playing with the National Youth Jazz Orchestra. We did a broadcast for the BBC that was shown on BBC Two, and the next day I got a phone call from a contractor. In England we call them fixers. A man named David Katz was a violin player who was responsible for getting a number of people started in the studio world. And he called everybody darling. I didn't know this at first. I thought he was being fresh, So he said, well, darling, I have a session for you next week. And I said, sorry, David, I can't do it. It's my final exams. And I thought I'd never hear from him again. And a week later, he called me back. And then I started getting session work through him. Then I got involved with some other contractors. And eventually, I was doing a lot of records, some jingles, but mostly records. Not a lot of TV, a little bit, and a little bit of movie work. I did play on the score of The Spy Who Loved Me with Marvin Hamlish.
How exciting. And also Grammy for the Pink Panther, yeah?
Well, that was much later, but that wasn't the original Pink Panther. That was an arrangement I did of a solo guitar arrangement I did of the Pink Panther theme that was the album won Best Pop Instrumental about, I don't know.
Spectacular.
2005, about 20 years ago, I think now. I'm almost, because the first Grammy was from when I was in Wings.
Ah, yes.
For the Rockestra theme, which was the first rock instrumental Grammy that was ever awarded. So I think about every 25 years I seem to be due.
You're due.
Yeah, but then Elsie, my daughter Elsie, has kind of taken up the slack a little bit because she's been nominated a few times and got a certificate for her contribution to Beyonce's Lemonade album too. So yeah, but once I got into studio work, I mean that was just really, really busy. For 3 years, I was working sometimes 7 days a week, sometimes 3, even 4 sessions a day. And this wasn't
anything that you love. Was there any projects that you played on then memorable that you just said, okay, this is fantastic. I love this.
Well, I did an album with Charles Aznavour in Paris that I discovered from my own Wikipedia page years later that was #1 in France for basically the whole year of 1978. But the memorable moments. I mean, doing the Spy Who Loved Me was pretty memorable. Especially there was one session I did with Marvin Hamlish and a string orchestra where we did an instrumental version of Nobody Does It Better. That was, and then at the end of the session, they ran some tape by me and said, just play some blues licks over this. So I did and forgot all about it and then discovered years later it was the end of the Carly Simon record. So,
wow.
But I was working on a TV show with David Essex.
Now, how did you go from session work to television? How did you?
Well, but that was still session work.
It was still session
television
work?
was part of it. I mean, I would do I remember Sunday evenings there were these variety shows that I would go play. I was always the youngest musician, in some of these big kind of orchestra type things. Variety shows and stuff like that were broadcast shows. But the David Essex show was a TV show. He was a big pop star at the time, and the house band was off camera. I mean, it wasn't an on camera thing, and we each week there would be a different musical guest. So like one week Twiggy came on and I did Send in the Clowns with David Essex, and you can find that on YouTube. It's actually and you can hear my guitar playing. Acoustic guitar playing on that. And then the next week we had Ronnie Spector came on, and then Denny Laine was a guest. show. And he did Go Now, which was, his signature song from the Moody Blues. And I played a guitar solo on it, and he liked what I did. In fact, if you find the video of him doing it, when I launch into the solo, he does this kind of sideways smile. And it was like, I think my life, the trajectory of my career changed completely in that moment, because it was Denny who recommended me to Paul.
Okay, but now wait a minute, because from what I heard, that's not the first. You didn't meet Paul, though, the first time.
No, I had met Paul earlier. I had met Paul some months earlier when I was working on a session at a studio in North London. In fact, I was working with Herbie Flowers, who passed away recently, who was he was the bass player on Walk on the Wild Side. Lou Reed. He was great bass player, and a lovely guy. And we had our musicians union break. And in England, you got 15 minutes in a 3-hour session. In the States, you get 10 minutes in the hour. So our breaks were a little more valuable then. We went off to the men's room and walk in, and there's Paul McCartney zipping up his fly. So a very inauspicious first meeting with the Beatles. But then, Denny, I ran into them, actually Denny and Paul and Linda, at another studio some months later, where I was early for a session and they were running late, and Denny invited me in. That was when I kind of formally got to meet Paul and Linda. But Denny was the one who recommended me. But, I had worked with Denny for the first time in September of 77. I got the call to audition for Wings in April of 78. So it wasn't like an overnight thing. It took
right.
And Steve Holley and I auditioned at the same time.
Oh, I love Steve Holley.
Yes.
Now, did you had to this point? Had you been with a band for any length of time? Had you been a part of a band for any length of time?
Not like that.
Not like that.
I had worked with bands, and I was with a few, kind of more jazz-oriented ensembles. There was a band called Landscape, who had a hit in the 80s. I forget the name of the song, but invention. When I left the band, they didn't replace me. They didn't have a guitar player in the end.
Wow.
So I did gigs with them for a while. I did some gigs with Pete Brown. Had a band. Pete Brown, who's a lyricist for Cream, had a band called Back to the Front. I worked with them for a while. But pretty much, I was a freelance player. As a teenager, I had worked in bands, and I had actually written songs, but those tapes long disappeared, and nothing that I really have any recollection of. I mean, it was just I was so single-mindedly focused on becoming a studio player. So when I joined Wings, it was very different. Being in Wings was very different from the average kind of band that's kind of out on the road all the time and trying to make a living doing it. I mean, there I am in the studio with the Beatles.
Oh my! And so, okay, so tell us about Denny recommended you. You had I assume you had an audition.
Yeah, there was an audition, and I had actually I was working in Abbey Road. I was working in Studio 2 at Abbey Road when I got the phone call, which was very unusual to get a phone call in the studio, because of course this is the days before cell phones, and so I went to take the call, and it was Paul's office saying, Denny wants to know if you can come and jam on Monday, and oh, by the way, Paul and Linda will be there, which kind of panicked me a bit because I really didn't know any Wings tunes. Stuff I was listening to was like, Mahavishnu Orchestra, Return to Forever, Weather Report, stuff that was, more fusion-y.
Right.
And I borrowed some LPs from my brother over the weekend, but, it was like, where do you start? And as it turned out, we played some Chuck Berry tunes and some reggae grooves, and that was and
you auditioned with Steve. Did you know each other at the time?
No, we didn't. We hadn't worked together. And then Paul said, "What are you doing for the next few years?" Now, studio musician, work with the Beatles. I mean, which one do you take?
Hello.
And I'd spent so much time establishing myself as a studio player. And, the history of Wings that, where the band had turned over a few times in the course of, that decade. But I
Denny
wasn't able to take
Sidewell is
the
also a good
opportunity.
friend of mine.
Who's that? Oh, Denny
Denny,
Sam.
yes.
Yeah, now Denny and I have done a lot of work together, but we didn't work in Wings together.
Right.
Yeah, because he was in the first incarnation. But I
So
wasn't
was that a concern for
that
you when you
opportunity.
took the gig but I would imagine it wouldn't have been because you would just go back to your session work, right?
Yeah, it doesn't work like that with session work. Once you
Uh-huh.
step out of that world, somebody else steps into that
I
spot.
see. And you don't get the calls anymore.
And also, by the time Wings was starting to wind down 3 years later, the studio world in England was not in the same place. The economy in England was in bad shape in the early Thatcher years in the early 80s. The people were starting to make records in 8-track studios or even on Porter studios. And the technology was starting to evolve. Drum machines were putting drummers out of work, and it just
Right.
was a different world. A
Well,
different
how long did it take you to make when he asked you that question? Did you answer in real time or did
Yeah,
you
no, it
hesitate?
was like a nanosecond.
Hmm.
I wasn't going to say no,
Hmm.
not to working with Paul McCartney.
Hmm. Did you, and I assume you have no regrets.
No real regrets. I mean, him standing next to him when he got busted in Tokyo was a regrettable incident.
Okay, so tell us about that, please,
I'd rather
Laurence.
not.
Oh,
I mean, I was standing next to him going through customs. There was a bag of grass that was not that well hidden in the suitcase. And he got caught. And so our Japanese tour got, canceled. And Wings still kept going after that, but we weren't touring. And then, of course, when John Lennon died, it was like Paul and Linda realized that they were not going to be going on the road for, and they didn't. I mean, until, best part of a decade, they didn't tour again.
mhm,
By which time I was already long gone.
mhm.
As soon as Wings was winding down, I moved to New York and started getting into studio work there, and also working on a project with Richard T. Bear. But when I met Hope and fell instantly in love and started commuting to LA, and I realized that I'd rather live in LA than in New York. And then we got married, and she got pregnant on our wedding night, and it was like, okay, I'm not going to go on the road with kids, So
Oh, got pregnant
yeah,
on your wedding night. All
yeah.
right,
Nico was born like 9 months to the minute.
oh my, all right, before we get to LA, let's just talk about those Wings years just a little bit. So the first time you hit the stage and you're playing with Paul,
Hmm.
I mean, does all of that, do you have that moment? I'm on this stage, I'm playing with the Beatles. This,
Yeah,
this
I
is,
mean, there you pinch yourself. Yeah.
yeah.
But we had spent a lot of time in the studio too.
Mm,
So, from my perspective, from the creative side of it, from the kind of studying at the feet of an artist like that. I mean, I like to think of my time with Paul as getting my master's degree from McCartney University.
mm,
It was a great education. Not just on the creative side, but also I learned a lot about the business side too. Because he has a substantial publishing catalog that
mm.
isn't entirely his own stuff. I mean, he has, over the years accumulated a lot of great music, but that's because Linda's dad, Lee Eastman, was really kind of the leading music business attorney in New York
Mm.
and had represented Tommy Dorsey and Frank Lesser and all kinds of people. So that Paul made some very wise moves, in terms of putting together a publishing organization. I mean, he's got outside of the US, he has the Buddy Holly catalog, for example,
Mm.
which is why he always does Buddy Holly Week every September. So it was all in all, it was a great experience, and it burnished my resume to the point where coming to LA, I had some credentials beyond simply being a studio sotist from London.
And personally, how was your relationship with Paul and Linda?
Linda in particular, I mean, I spent a lot of time with her. And you know, as a couple, they very much they functioned as a couple. You know, and that was really something that when Hope and I got married, and you know, we function as a couple. We make decisions for the two of us, not individually. It was one of the reasons why I didn't want to go out and be a touring musician when the kids were little. And even when I did start touring on my own, I was very, very careful about how I structured it. So, you know, then I had that Wings experience and then moved to LA and started a whole new act of my career at that point.
And what did that look like?
Well, I got into studio work, you know, relatively quickly. I mean, within the first 6 months or so. And then it was like, you know, a lot of TV. I mean, I played on the last episode of Happy Days. I actually had, there was one week I played, I had met Michael Lloyd, who's a record producer, very successful record producer. And I did a session for him where we did songs for an episode of Joni Loves Chachi, where Mitch Weissman, who had played Paul in Beatlemania.
Mitch Weissman is one of my oldest, dearest friends.
Well,
I
Mitch,
love Mitch.
you know, Mitch was playing Paul on Joni Loves Chachi, and we recorded, I think, I Want to Hold Your Hand. I forget what else we did, but we recorded that. And then the next day, I did a session with a composer named Dan Folliott for the underscore to the same show, which came from a completely different direction. And that relationship with Dan led to doing Roseanne, Home Improvement, all 11 seasons of Seventh Heaven. And also, you know, doing a lot of record stuff, not just with Michael Lloyd, but with other producers too. And in the process, also working with Hope, because Hope had a comedy rock and roll band called the Housewives that went through various incarnations, but by the late 80s, with Maggie Mayle, John Mayall's, at the time, John Mayall's wife, and Lisa Harrison, were doing, you know, they were doing the Home Show, which was an ABC morning show. They were doing that on kind of like a house band. I mean, and we were writing songs for that. I started scoring my first, let's see, what was my first scoring gig? Oh, it was a Bruce Dern movie called World Gone Wild. Which there's a story behind that, but basically I had written a song called World Gone Wild with Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols and Michael Barr, and they had a band called Checkered Past, and the song was like on that album, and Kerrang! Magazine voted it Heavy Metal Album of the Year in like 1984, and it sold maybe 3 copies and then disappeared. And then Hope found this newspaper article in an old LA Times calendar that she was about to put in the recycling, saying that Apollo Pictures were making a movie called Walk on Wild. And so she talked to her brother Lloyd, who said, do we know anybody at Apollo? She said, do we know anybody at Apollo Pictures? And Lloyd said, yeah, Bob Rosen co-produced Gilligan's Island with Dad, because, you know, Hope's dad was Sherwood Schwartz, who created Gilligan's Island. So Hope tracked Bob Rosen down shooting the movie in Arizona and pitched the song. And he said, well, we already have a song called Walk on Wild. And it was done by a group called Checkered Past. And they sent me the script, and the first page of the script was a lyric of the song. And the next day I got
oh my
affairs. And then I ended up, because I own my publishing on the song, so I could issue a license on it. But I did a demo where I took the riffs from the song and orchestrated it. You know, I had a little MIDI set up. And I went to where they were editing the movie, and in those days it wasn't on video. It was on a moviola, you know, like old school. And they had a scene with no temp score, without a temporary music score. And I had it on cassette and no MP3s back in the 80s.
Right.
We lined up the film and the cassette and hit play at the same time. And somehow I managed to hit every cut on the picture. And they are, without ever having seen the picture. And
wow.
They offered me the score. So I did that. I did a John Hurt movie called Little Sweetheart. And then when Sherwood was doing Very Brady Christmas, he asked me to do the score for that. So that was.
How did you end up working with Snuffy?
Snuffy approached me because I guess he had one of my albums, and He was doing like 1 million shows at the same time, and there was this particular show that the concept was to have kind of a fingerstyle guitar score, and of course Snuffy was famous for having done that as a composer, and I was kind of making waves, in the fingerstyle world, and he approached me and said, hey, interested in doing this, and so he kind of set me up in the right direction with it, and then supervised me doing my work on it. And it lasted, I think, a season, Three Sisters, on NBC. But I just found myself doing, scoring work, and did a project for Disney Sea in Tokyo. If you ever go to eat at Magellan's restaurant at Disney Sea theme park, the music that plays in the background is a suite for guitar and string quartet that I wrote. And I did, and then subsequently did video game work. I did co-compose the score for Diablo 3. And, but busy putting out albums of my own, doing session work.
So many, and you've played with Harry
producing
Styles.
Al Stewart records.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I produced 4 albums for Al Stewart.
Yes, I do know that. Yeah. Yes,
starting in 1995, I think it was.
And you've played with him live as well,
together.
haven't you? Yes.
I'm sorry?
Yeah. And you've played live with him.
Yeah, no, we toured as an acoustic duo for a few years. And I just, it's all in a day's work. And Hope and I still work together. I mean, we wrote the Gilligan's Island score together. The Brady Bunch musical, we did a workshop of it some years ago at Theatre West here in LA. And she also co-wrote the book for that with her brother. And it's what I do. I play guitar, I write music, I arrange, I produce, and I have fun doing it.
Well, it's wonderful. And so I'm going to drive people to your page. I'm going to put the link to your page. How can people best support you right now? What should they buy right now?
Well, my latest album is called A Day in My Life, which I recorded at Abbey Road in Studio 2 in August of 2023. And I took a dozen of some of my favorite Beatle arrangements and did it. But that's available on vinyl.
Wow.
I still have a few copies left. It was a limited edition vinyl. I grudgingly did CDs, but that wasn't really my concept on it. And then my entire catalog is available, Spotify, Apple Music. Stuff's on YouTube. I mean, it's all out there. Though I think the one thing that is really important for people to understand when it comes to live shows is if you buy your tickets in advance, then the venue knows that they have the audience, they have a sense of the size of the audience. So especially if it's a place like the Write-Off Room, for example, where, you've got bar staff or wait staff to deal with, where
right.
They'd like to know in advance how many people are going to show up. If everybody pays at the door, the problem is that the venue aren't necessarily prepared for it.
Right.
So getting tickets in advance is a good piece of advice. And to be supportive, I mean, live music right now. I mean, this coming Tuesday, whatever date is, the 28th, I think it is, isn't it?
Yes, it's the 28th.
As he looks at his calendar, yeah. 28th is at the Canyon Club in Agora, is the big tribe benefit, and I'll be playing some stuff on that. I'm playing locally, with Christina Rich. I'm musical director for her show at Vibrato, which is on February 19th. February 15th, I'm doing a solo show at Boulevard Music in Culver City, which is a kind of an annual thing that I do. It's Boulevard Music, similar to McCabe's.
Lovely.
Slightly smaller version. It's a guitar store. It's like a folk venue. And then, there's a calendar on my website that has all the stuff that's going on. But I'm really not doing anywhere near as much touring as I used to. I'm sticking pretty close to home now. So if I'm on the East Coast, it's it's not something that happens every other month. I mean, it's kind of an annual or biannual thing. So, but Southern California, I mean, Northern California, I just got back from doing 3 days. We did 3 days in Northern California doing the Beatles' White Album, and Tal Bachman was with us, and those were fun and challenging. And I do get involved with concerts at the Grammy Museum where we do like complete Beatle albums. In fact, we recently did Abbey Road and Sticky Fingers. We did the Stones too, and Bernard Fowler sang with us. So
I know Bernard well. Yes,
singing
lovely.
with the Stones for years. So that was pretty cool.
Fantastic. So it sounds like the website
busy.
is the way that people can best
Yeah,
keep track
I mean,
of
I do have a
everything that you're
mailing
doing.
list when I kind of remember to send out mailers, but the website Bands in Town is a website that will often, if you subscribe to me on that, it'll tell you if I'm playing in your area. But my website and my calendar is always pretty much up to date.
Well, I will direct people there. Laurence, thank you so much. Before you go, I'm going to have you play again. But
Oh,
thank
yeah.
you so much for doing this. It was so lovely to meet you and to get to know you a bit. And I hope that I see you in the real world soon. And okay, so tell us what you're going to play before
Well, I
we go
think
out.
given all the given everything that's going on, While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Beautiful. That was magnificent. You brought a tear. Beautiful, Laurence. Thank you so much. Wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much. See you Tuesday, I hope, at the Canyon Club.
Oh,
Thank you
yes.
for all you do.
Well, thanks for having me on. And
My
thanks
great
everybody for
pleasure.
watching too.